Raymond Woodie has completely overhauled the Bethune Cookman coaching staff, just like he was supposed to. Oh yeah, it's Locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked on HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked on HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked on HBCU your first listen of the day. Every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey's over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives right here at the bottom of the screen. But if you're on the audio side of things and only hear me, don't forget to add the S on the end of South Exclusives. Also, don't forget to follow the Locked On newsletter. Scan this QR code I'm pointing at right now. I'm sorry if you're on the audio side. I think you can find it on the website. I could be wrong. But scan this QR code or maybe just join us here on the YouTube side. Just for a moment, go ahead and scan this QR code and add yourself to the newsletter. I'm signed up myself. I stay educated on the NFL, NBA, then also on the draft and anything that I want to know in between with my favorite squads. This is the place to be. This is the thing to sign up for. We have a packed show. I'm very interested with this week's programming and what direction that it takes. But today's episode, we're going to look into the fact that the SWAC is not a two-bid conference, and they're not close to being that when it comes to the NCAA tournament. I'm not hating. I'm just quoting Dr. Charles McClelland. I'm just quoting our commissioner. So don't put it on me. You have a problem with it? Put it on him. That's who said it. But then also, Raymond Woodie Jr. is the new head football coach of Bethune Cookman, got announced about 2 months ago. He's doing the right decision. He's overhauling the coaching staff, and there's one commonality in between the majority of these guys. Now, why do I say it's the right decision? Let's kick it off with a couple of numbers that I'm just going to say to you, and then I'm going to explain why these numbers actually tell the story of why overhauling this coaching staff was the complete correct decision. I already agree with it. I didn't even need to see the names who are attached to it. I just thought that change was necessary. Now, one, this is year one of Raymond Woodie's era. Two, that's the amount of coaches that Bethune Cookman has had in this calendar year. Three, that's the amount of remaining coaches who are held over, the amount of coaches who actually stayed on Bethune Cookman staff and are still there for Coach Woodie. And then four, and I promise you this is not counting up, but 1, 2, 3 into the 4. That's the amount of games that Bethune Cookman has won in the last 2 seasons. Now let's break down each and every one of these numbers at some length, because you now know what 1, 2, 3, and 4 actually represent. But I must tell you, why is it important? Why do they decide that this was the right decision? So let's go in order like we just did. 1, it's the first year one, however you want to say it to make it sound the most appropriate for you. This is the first year of Raymond Woodie's era at Bethune Cookman as a head coach. These are the moments when you can do this and nobody questions. If you do this 3-4 years into your tenure and it's not because a bunch of people got selected, like for example, Kansas City, the Kansas City Chiefs, they just overhauled their coaching staff in a way because they had so many people who were picked away. If you're 3-4 years in and your staff isn't getting picked away for better opportunities and you have to do an overhaul, that's when you should start panicking. I've never seen a coach decide to fire his whole staff when things were going great to bring in new people. Anytime there's an overhaul, it's because of panic from somebody. There's panic, okay? 2, the amount of, also this is kind of what you're supposed to do in year one. You're supposed to make this your own. You're supposed to create your own staff. So that's another reason nobody would side eye it. It makes sense. This is the logical move, basically probably 8 times out of 10, unless you have a coach who is an interim and just continued being the head coach going forward, then he might keep a lot more of the staff. 2, that's the amount of coaches that Bethune Cookman has had this year. That's just kind of funny to me. First off, that's part of the reason I said it. It's funny. It makes me laugh. The whole Ed Reed situation, now that we've gotten past it, it's just crazy. And what he said wasn't funny, but it just kind of makes me chuckle looking back at it and seeing what it was and how it all transpired. So now you have Raymond Woodie Jr., but more importantly than that, I said this as soon as he was hired. Matter of fact, before he was hired, I said this. Before I knew who it was going to be. Whoever the prospective head coach after Ed Reed was going to be, he had to come in and have firm control. He had to show strong leadership. He had to show that, yes, I understand that Ed Reed had a profound impact on a lot of these student athletes, a lot of them, not even just limiting it to football, volleyball, baseball. It felt like everybody just kind of rallied around Ed Reed. Most of all, the football team. You had to come in with firm control. I'm not asking you to erase them. There was probably a certain level of passion that he ignited in these players that will be good for them if it's withstanding and goes for, as long as the next 7 months are going to be, or next 6 months are going to be, because we're in March. We're not going to start till September. So yeah, the next 6 months is probably a good thing. But at the same time, you have to show everybody this is your program. And one of the ways to show it is to kind of just create your own staff, because it creates your own culture. There's only 3 guys. That's the next number. 3 guys who are held over. Now, I would never advocate for anybody to lose their job. And I know that's kind of how this sounds. But this is a necessary evil. It just is. When you look at the fact that they only won 4 games in the last 2 seasons, 2-9, 2-9. Somebody has to go. Somebody has to go. If the head coach isn't going to leave after 2 seasons back-to-back this poorly, then it's going to be the coaching staff. And if the head coach leaves after 2 seasons back-to-back that are this poor, the coaching staff is likely going to go too. In a way, the coaching staff is just an inevitable cut. It's just going to happen. You're going to have some people who peek through. They look like light at the end of the tunnel. They look like people who can be actual additions to your program. And those guys will stay. And those guys were Coach Chad Lucas, the wide receiver coach, Jeff Fagan, the general manager, Ricky Lehman, the director of football video. It's 2 staff members. So I'm not just talking about coaching staff. I really should say staff members in general, just to make sure that everybody understands it's very wide. It's not just positional coaches and coordinators and assistant head coaches. It's director of football operations. It's video personnel. It's everybody on there. It's 17 people in total, 16 if you're not including the head coach. But those are important. It's year 1. He has to establish his control. He has to establish his culture, because he's the second new head coach that they're going to have in the matter of just a couple of months. There's only 3 guys who are held over. And there's a reason to that. It's because you only won 4 games. There's not a lot of familiarity when it comes to the players in relating to the coaches. There's only 3 of them if you're a returning player that you knew from last season, right? And Ed Reed didn't bring any guys in who had to be laid off. I highly doubt that's the case, but 3 guys that you remember from last year. And all of it is because you only won 4 games. That's why you're in a situation like this. That's why Woody is here. But when I say that the players are going to lack familiarity with the coaches, that's not exactly a commonality that I think the coaches share with each other. Familiarity to me was the driving force behind nearly half of the new hires, and we'll break down each one of these guys as we continue with Locked on HBCU. Before we get into that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports book. Let me get that up because for some reason it was not clicking, but let me go ahead and get that up because FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, when I'm looking at March Madness, I know your bracket's busted. If your bracket isn't busted, let me tell you tell me right now. Drop it in the comments. Tweet me. Let me know if your bracket is still going strong. I highly doubt it, though. You don't have to worry about that when it comes to FanDuel. You don't have to worry about being perfect. You just have to worry about this game. And guess what? If you don't get this game that you're putting money down on right, you have the no sweat first bet, meaning that if you lose, they're going to give you a rack. They're going to give you $1,000 up to $1,000 back in free bets. So even if you lost, you didn't really lose. You just get another opportunity to win. And it's up to you if you can make some better bets. You have same game parlays. You have the 2 for 3, which is 2 3-pointers in the first 3 minutes of a game. You have over-unders. You have the point spread. You have everything that you could think of when it comes to betting, and it's on FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more. And as we continue rolling with today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Basketball for everything you need around the sport. And then also a bracket breakdown is going to have live reactions. It's everything around March Madness, live as you need it, when you need it, as soon as possible, and with the expert knowledge that you can't get anywhere else. Just make sure that you are listening or watching wherever you get your podcast, including where you're listening to me right now. Continuing with the thread of Raymond Woodie overhauling Bethune Cookman's coaching staff, I felt like it was the right decision for the numbers that I laid out in segment 1. And now as we continue, let me tell you about how familiarity is the driving, I wouldn't even say driving force. I'll take that back. Familiarity is the connecting thread when it comes to a lot of these guys. So I said this was the case when it came to Woody being hired by Bethune Cookman, but I also think that there's a chance that he decided to have familiarity through his coaching staff as well. I'm going to read off the coaches and faculty, or not faculty, they're not teachers, but the coaches and then staff members who are just a part of, read off these guys who are connected to, I should say, and are part of the coaching staff. And then I'll read the guys who aren't connected to Woody or the school in general. So you start off with DJ McCarthy, an assistant head coach and special teams coordinator. He's a former Bethune Cookman coach, so this isn't his first time being here, not at all. But then you also look at the fact that, also he was an assistant coach there, but then you also look at the fact that he was just at Florida Atlantic with Woody. He was just there with Woody, all right? So now he has the Bethune Cookman tie and he has the Coach Woody tie. Then you look at Tim Weston, director of football operations. He previously worked with Woody at Florida State as a recruiting assistant. And we know how Woody loves his recruiting. We know that's a big thing for him. Myron Dillard, director of recruiting. This is his second season with Woody. He also came from Florida Atlantic, similar to McCarthy. Weston was at Florida State. These first and third person, they came from Florida Atlantic. And we know how important recruiting is. So you have somebody who was a recruiting assistant with Woody, and then you also have somebody who is now the director of recruiting under Woody as a head coach. I don't take that title lightly. I think that's very important. Then you have John DeSeen, operation assistant. He was the former player at Bethune Cookman, a former player and a former coach. He has that Bethune Cookman tie. So you see that, not connected to Woody, but connected to the school. Then you have Nick Collins, cornerback coach, former Bethune Cookman player, and he's a 3-time All-Pro in the NFL, including a Super Bowl champion. You see the connections going. Dante Pimpleton, he's the co-offensive coordinator and running backs coach. I really love him because you're trying to replace Quayshawn Bird, and you're trying to replace Jalen Jones. So both of those guys are the only 2 rushers, though Jones is a quarterback. They are the only 2 rushers to have more than 100 yards last year. So why not bring in a guy who brought Florida Atlantic their first 1,000-yard rusher since Devin Singletary. So you're looking at nearly half a decade without a 1,000-yard rusher. He came in the season and was able to restore that. That's the type of guy that you want. Now you go into the people who were not connected to either the school or Woody. David Stuckman, he's going to be the passing game coordinator and safeties coach. Brandon Washington, he's going to be the offensive line coach. Demetrius Coley, he's going to be the defensive line coach. Tavarius Jackson, Nichols outside linebackers coach, right? So also I kind of like that terminology. Kind of tells me that you're going to run kind of a hybrid system. You might have a very aggressive slot corner. We've seen that, or I've seen that. I don't want to put you in that category. But I've seen that with the Chauncey Gardner-Johnsons of the world, a guy who is very aggressive. He is clearly a defensive back. However, he plays on the inside, kind of like Vaccaro. Like just if you're a Saints fan, any guy it feels like they've had in the slot over the last 5-6 years, it feels like, they have been an aggressive guy. I wonder if being a nickel / outside linebackers coach is going to lend itself to a more aggressive defensive back on the inside. That's just something to look out for. Just something I'll throw out there when talking about Tavarius Jackson, and then also the Bethune Cookman just coaching staff, or defensive personnel. Then you have Shelton Gaffney. He's going to be the head strength coach. Joe Garbino, he's going to be the co-offensive coordinator, He's going to be the co-offensive coordinator and then also the quarterback coach. He had his quarterbacks and wide receivers breaking school records on the D3 level. So you're going to need a new quarterback. You're going to have to reload and be better against defenses through the air this year, in my opinion. You're going to have to be better at that. So the co-offensive coordinators are very important. Then you also have Robert Wimberly, and he's going to be your defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. Now, when you look at it, you have 6 coaches who are either affiliated in the past with the school, Bethune Cookman, or affiliated with Raymond Woodie. And in McCarthy's sake, it was both of them. I don't think that's an accident. It's not the majority. It's 6 out of 13. It's nearly half and half, right? And if you really want to get into it, you're talking about new hires. If Raymond Woodie counts, it's literally right down the middle, 7 and 7. I've said it before. I think this was a reason that Woodie was hired, especially after the fiasco. It's the reason he was hired. He had familiarity. You knew he would understand what he was getting into. And I wonder, does Woodie have that same approach when building his coaching staff? Coincidence? Could be. But the intention behind it doesn't really matter. The thread is there. Because likely, if you don't want to count the Bethune-Cookman affiliates, we can definitely count the people who are connected to Woodie. Because the people who are connected to Woodie scream trust, scream familiarity to the coach. That's what you build when you have a coaching staff. You have a bunch of people who you know how they operate, you know how they get down, you know you can trust them. And then here goes the most important part. Look at the positions of power, the positions of high responsibility. Co-offensive coordinator, director of football operations. You see these things. You have assistant head coach. So when you're looking at building the coaching staff, I know that he valued familiarity, despite how many it is. When I look at my co-offensive coordinator being somebody I worked with, when I look at my director of football operations as being somebody I worked with, when I look at my assistant head coach as being somebody I worked with, these are all positions that I'm going to place a lot of responsibility on, and I made sure to fill them with guys I worked with at Florida Atlantic. That tells me it's a common thread. It tells me it's something he valued. Whether it was for the same reasons as the school valued it or not, he valued familiarity. He got to get in the position where he felt he needed it the most. And that, in addition to being just the correct move to overhaul, I'll say this. It was the correct decision to overhaul Bethune Cookman's coaching staff for all of the numbers I said. And right now, familiarity, trust, those being common threads between the coaching staff, I can say that he has overhauled it the correct way on paper. Of course, we'll wait until the fall to see exactly what it looks like. But on paper, he made the right decision and he went about it the right way. Going forward, we're going to stay in the SWAC, but we're going to go to basketball because but we're going to go to basketball because the SWAC is not a too big conference. And according to the doc, they ain't ready to be it yet. Let's discuss this as we continue with Locked On HBCU. And as we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Every day, I truly do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart, the left ventricle, right? But the SWAC has a long way to go before they are a two-bid conference in the NCAA tournament. Once again, don't shoot the messenger. Don't try to say I'm hating. I promise you I'm not. I wouldn't dare hate. I would love to see them be a two-bid conference. But according to the SWAC commissioner, Dr. Charles McClelland, they ain't ready yet. They have a long way to go. Anything that you feel is delivered like this makes me happy, I promise you it's just delivery. It's just entertainment. I'm not going to say anything I don't mean at all. But if you see me just delivering in a certain kind of way, that's because I'm trying to have fun. Now, the HBCU's placement in the NCAA tournament has been a hot topic over the last week. Something a lot of people have discussed. I would like to say, pat yourself on the back, mouth of the South. You are ahead of this when talking about HBCUs in the tournament. I think I did this like a month ago. It's old news to me. But seriously, this is a conversation that a lot of people are having. How many HBCUs should be in the NCAA tournament? How many HBCUs should be in the NIT tournament? How many HBCUs should play postseason basketball, period? Whether it's the NCAA tournament, March Madness, or if it's the NIT, the CBI, whatever. Should we create our own? All of these have been talking points. All of these things have been discussed. The one common thread is that more HBCUs deserve to be able to play postseason ball. You should have multiple teams from a conference. And I'll say this, 3 or more, because you can't have 2. Right now, if you win the tournament, you're in the big one. You're in the big dance. If you won the regular season, but you didn't win the tournament, you're in the NIT. Now, if that team is just the same team, like at Alcorn just won the tournament, it'll only be one HBCU from the SWAC, one team from the SWAC playing in this tournament and playing postseason basketball, period. That's not enough for a lot of people. Well, Charles McClelland said it's not going to change anytime soon. And he really did blame the lower teams in the conference. And he also said it's a financial situation. Who would have thought that this had to do with strength of schedule? Man, I wish I could think of somebody who hosted Locked On HBCU who just said it was a strength of schedule thing. And I know that can be hard to accept. Strength of schedule is important. But if you couldn't accept it from me, and I understand why you wouldn't be able to accept it from me. It's something you don't want to accept at all. But when you're a commissioner, somebody who has a seat very close with the committee tells you that strength of schedule and net rankings are the reasons there are not 2 SWAC schools playing in the NCAA tournament, you've gone from not wanting to accept it to strictly being in denial. If you don't listen to him, he's telling you what it is. It's not an opinion. It's not a thought. He is close enough to where his word should hold a lot of weight. I ain't mad about the doc's word holding more weight than mine. It should. I don't blame you for that at all. But let's listen to what he has to say, because it's important. And he's just being realistic. I don't think he's being pessimistic on the situation. But he said it like this. He said teams are going to have to play 11 to 12 money guarantee games. There's certain teams in the SWAC who are going to have to do that. And if you have to play those, it's going to bring down your net rankings. And here goes a quote directly. In order for those 5 to 6 schools, because not every team has to play that many money guarantee games, and it's a financial situation. I understand why they happen. I said this all before, but we're going to reflect because the doc said it. In order for those 5 to 6 schools to be able to get to where they need to be, the other 5 to 6 schools are going to have to bring their part of it, because you can't enter the conference with a net ranking, KenPom ranking, all of these rankings being in the low 100s. So even in the 90s, 80s, 70s, and then start playing conference schools, and its net ranking is going to skyrocket. So the bottom 6 are going to have to make sure that they carry their weight to be able to bring up the top 6 in order for us to get out of just being an automatic qualifier conference. Now, what that means is that a school like Grambling, Grambling had a good season, a really good season. But maybe a team like Alabama State didn't. Maybe Alabama State's season wasn't that hot. Like those things matter. Who your conference plays matters. So when a bunch of teams in your conference are going in and they're playing money games, because they have to have that stability. They have to play that to have the stability, I should say. You're now looking at a situation where the top teams who don't have to play as many are going to suffer because the net ranking is going to be low. And it's, how they say a high tide raises all boats. Well, I guess a low tide can sink all boats in this situation. That's the best way to look at it. When Dr. McClelland says the lower teams need to carry the weight, that's because they're bringing down the top teams. And all it takes is an even split of really low and pretty decent. You're not great. It's not great and terrible. It's pretty good and terrible, or maybe even decent, average, okay, and terrible. That's going to bring you down a lot. These are things that we have to come to grips with. We have to be honest. I know what we want, but let's take ourselves out of the occasion, of the situation. Take ourselves out of what we desire and look at what the real problem is. We can't walk around saying Grambling should be able to do this. Grambling should be able to do that. I agree. I would love to have seen Grambling play a team in a tournament. But as currently constructed, it just does not work. And we have to accept that. And I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day every day. I hope the hard truth doesn't scare you away. Come back tomorrow for the hard truth again, because on tomorrow's episode, we're going to be talking about the SWAC and the MEAC scheduling each other more, and why I think it's probably a little easier for the MEAC to make that decision as opposed to the SWAC. For your second listen of the day, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Basketball. For everything you need around the sport, it's the best time in college basketball right now, March Madness. So make sure you're checking out the podcast specifically meant for that. And in the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until next time we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed, subscribe to the newsletter. Peace.